Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of commonality in what we've discussed today, and I'd like to thank Minister Gentleman for his comments and his amendment, and Ms Lakuta for her comments on behalf of the Greens. I think there is a real desire to ensure that parts of our history, as relevant, as appropriate, are maintained for future generations. But it was interesting, there's been a bit of a hands-off approach talking about the Heritage Council being independent, yet, Madam Deputy Speaker, today we spent quite some time debating an issue that's determined by an independent federal body, but apparently it's not appropriate for us to direct the work of a local so-called independent body. It's an issue of heritage that Mr Gentleman was more than happy to take questions on and talk about during the annual report hearings, which is why I felt that he was perhaps the best person to address my motion to today. And I'll quote from the hearings on the 6th of March, where Mr Gentleman said, "As you're probably aware," I'm quoting, "there are 10 criteria that need to be looked at with each nomination, so it's quite an involved process. During that process, we look at all aspects of heritage nomination. Indigenous aspects and architectural aspects of heritage nomination need to be looked through. Overarchingly, we are now receiving more nominations, and the amount of work involved in looking at each nomination is quite detailed." So I think the following comments led me to believe that Mr Gentleman would be in a position to ensure that what I've called on in this motion may be able to be addressed. However, I'm quite willing to take his comments today about the independent body, and that the Directorate is providing the administrative and secretariat support to the Heritage Council. But I would reiterate, Madam Deputy Speaker, the comment made that the decision rests with the Heritage Council as the independent decision-making body. I think that's pretty much verbatim quoting from what Mr Gentleman said, whereas in other areas, those opposite don't appear willing to make that distinction about an independent decision-making body. The heritage places, as I've said, bring the ACT's rich history into the spotlight. And heritage listings are not just about buildings, they're about landscapes, gardens, parks, farms, streets, towns, cemeteries, Aboriginal sites, archaeological relics, bridges, railway stations, churches, objects and natural places. Almost 2 years ago to the week, this chamber last discussed the heritage listing of Oaks Estate, and our Chief Minister, Andrew Barr, stated that undoubtedly Oaks Estate has a long and storied history, and it's indeed a strong and proud community, an integral part of the ACT, but one with a distinct identity of its own. Yet, in the ensuing 2 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing has changed with respect to the heritage assessment for Oaks Estate, or nothing that is in the public realm that we've been made aware of. And just at the beginning of this month, the Minister stated, "It's vital that we work together to recognise, protect, conserve and celebrate unique heritage for the ACT." And that's exactly what my motion was calling on today, that we have a plan and a commitment to heritage in the ACT, and we want the government to take heritage and heritage listings seriously. We acknowledge today, I believe, that there is a backlog of assessments, and that there is perhaps additional resources needed in this area. Heritage listing can bring greater certainty to people in the community about the changes that may take place to their area or their home or buildings nearby, and whether things will be sympathetic to identified heritage values. And with respect to the backlog of nominations, Madam Deputy Speaker, I bring to the Assembly's attention that in January of this year there was a story in the Canberra Times of some buildings that were demolished in Narrabundah while they were waiting for heritage assessment. And the article says and I quote, "The Narrabundah community has lost its fight to save 4 brick duplexes from demolition, but may yet see the destroyed homes heritage listed. Workers took to the Bulimba Crescent double-storey buildings on Wednesday to make way for 9 new public housing units. The old Narrabundah Community Council had pushed against the development, arguing it was yet to hear back about the heritage status of the duplexes." So, leaving aside, as I've said, I'm not in any way making a judgment about the heritage value of any particular buildings. Leaving that aside, a backlog like this for the Heritage Council will mean that these types of instances can happen again and again. Whether those buildings deserved heritage listing is not up to me and not up to this Assembly. But what we can do is try to ensure that things are addressed in a timely manner. The article does go on with some other points about some views that those particular duplexes had heritage value, but I guess that's not the point here. The point is that we need to ensure that the Heritage Council can go about their work in the most efficient and effective manner to ensure the history remains for our future generations as it's appropriate. That's why I'd called on the government today to prioritise clearing the backlog and prioritise clearing the nominations that have been on the register for an extended period of time. I take Minister Gentleman's point that the Heritage Council determined their work in a strategic manner and it's not necessarily by the oldest. But to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, it simply doesn't pass the pub test to have something on the list for 15 years. 15 years waiting to hear back about an assessment just doesn't make sense. So I will take on board Mr Gentleman's points and thank Ms Lakuta for her kind of support. You know, bet both ways, I think. And I guess we'll support Mr Gentleman's amendment, given that I must acknowledge that the Heritage Council is an independent body, and I'll look forward to Mr Gentleman's report back to the Assembly by the end of August, and I sincerely hope that there will have been significant progress on reducing the number of nominations on the Heritage Assessment list by that time. Thank you.
The question is the amendment be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is the motion as amended be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The Clerk.